Welcome back to the Fifth Disciplines podcast, where we talk about everything to do with people, brand, and systems. Last week, we had the first episode with Jon Dario, and this week we are continuing the conversation. So if you didn't listen to the episode last week, we highly recommend that you go and have a recap on what we chatted about. And welcome back to episode 2. Okay, so in your book, you talk about gravity-like law of team performance. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about what is gravity-like law? And just explain the concept a little bit more for us.
Sure. Thank you for bringing this up. Look, gravity is a scientific fact on Earth. We may not understand exactly how gravity works, and you can go back centuries. People couldn't even put a name to gravity, but the reality is that if you hold something up in the air and you let go of it, it's going to fall to the earth. We
Yep.
accept that. And similarly, I have an equation that I think is just as foundational to organizational success. And that equation is actions plus external influences equals results. And essentially what this equation says is that the results that you achieve are entirely dependent on the actions you take and any external influences that come into play.
Yeah.
It's a really simple concept, and maybe people listening to this would say, well, of course, but when you really boil it down and you make it that simple and you accept the truth of that equation, as a leader, you can begin to sort out the things that are external influences, which you have to be aware of and you have to be able to predict, but you can sort those from your actions. And the
Mm.
idea that the only thing that you as a leader can control are the actions. And
Yeah.
you are responsible for figuring out what actions are going to be necessary to get the desired results
Uh,
within the context of the external influences that you predict.
yes. Yeah. That's amazing. Before we dive into the maths behind it, or what we can get towards maths anyway, is
Right.
I just want to close up on the gravity-like law. So for managers, just to understand, what is a common type of gravity-like law that managers would ignore quite frequently? What is a sort of example there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, look, as I said, most of my background is in retail management, and it's an easy example from from the retail management world
Mm.
is the balance between achieving operational objectives during the day and dealing with customers. And there may be in a retail store, there may be a set of actions that have to be implemented to do merchandise moves, for instance, or to do inventory, or some sort of operational task. And oftentimes the flow of customers and the need to service those customers ends up getting in the way of doing the operational tasks.
Mm.
And so it can become a common rationalization for retail employees and managers to say, I couldn't get to the operational tasks because we had too many customers. And there's a couple of different problems with that. I mean, first of all, obviously the customers are the point of the business. You wouldn't have a business if you weren't serving the
Can't
customer.
ignore them.
Exactly. But in addition, there's the customers, at least from the standpoint of completing the operational tasks, the customers are an external influence. And you have to be able to plan out the actions within your expectations of the external influences. So I think managers who get trapped in the rationalization of external influences are missing the point. And that's
Yeah.
the point about the gravity. If you don't accept that there's going to be external influences and you have to predict them and figure out the actions that will get you around them, then you might as well be ignoring gravity.
Yeah, exactly. And the reality of the situation or situations, hey.
Right.
And then John, so let's go back to the maths around actions and external influences equals results versus
Right.
expected external influences equals intended results. But how do
Right.
you sort of monitor that gap? And also understand where you monitor the gap and you don't want it to turn into micromanagement of staff, but maybe, give some examples from your experience where you used this application and what you found, and then how do you avoid being a gap micromanager?
Right.
Mhm.
So I think there's a couple of key concepts baked into your really good question. First of all, that the idea that simple equation, actions plus external influences equals results, is kind of it kind of has these two ancillary equations. There's the intended actions and expected external influences, which lead to intended results. But then there's the actual form of each of those. The actual actions, the actual external influences lead to the actual results. And that gap between intended and actual is is not it's not unusual. In fact, it happens every day, right? So no matter how well you think you predicted the external influences, the actual external influences are probably going to be different. And no matter
Yeah.
how well you planned your intended actions, there's likely to be some deviation between the intention and what actually the team implements. So as a manager, your an important responsibility is to be aware of those gaps and to close those gaps. Because if you don't, if you close the gap between your intended actions and your actual actions, it's going to lead to some difference in the between the intended results and the actual results.
Yeah.
It's That's the math of the equation that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the to the point about micromanagement. I think that micromanagement becomes a problem when the manner of management becomes intrusive or becomes disrespectful or becomes onerous. Calling out gaps or helping the employees identify gaps on their own and resolve those gaps is not micromanagement. It's it's actually management.
Yeah.
And if you truly believe that people want to be successful, then and you have an obligation to help them identify and close those gaps on their own. And to the extent that you can lead them to doing it on their own, then you're being a help. You're not being a micromanager.
Fantastic. And you answered my next question without me even needing to ask. I was going to say, for managers, what do they prioritize? Fix it, teach it, or redesign the system?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to phrase it. I guess the answer depends a little bit on the situation, but I always
Yes.
like to say start with the assumption that your system's probably right, but execution might not be perfect. So fix it. But sometimes sure you identified the wrong actions, you identified the wrong process, and you need to redesign it. So try and solve the easy parts first. Don't create more work for yourself and the team unless it's warranted.
Yeah, I got you. And then just for managers understanding when they're sitting in expected or actual, I mean, what is the cadence of measurement and monitoring that you feel is a good time spent?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because it depends on so many things. It depends on the task at hand. It depends on the kind of the reporting cadence on the results. But I think the if you're not getting the results, then no matter then that's an indication that the frequency of your follow up and the frequency of your identification of the gaps is not good enough. So I believe that managers should ratchet the frequency of their check-ins to the need to deliver the results. I have a story, if you don't mind me taking a couple of minutes. I
Go
have a
for
story
it.
on this was a really foundational thing for me in the early part of my career. I was running a small sporting goods store, and I had 6 department supervisors, and we had a routine where every Monday morning we would walk the departments and make a list of all the stuff that needed to be done in their departments for the next Friday to get ready for the weekend business. I thought I was doing a good job by following up every Friday, and I thought I was fulfilling my management obligations. But every single Friday, none of the 6 department managers had their stuff done, and I
Uh,
started to get angry. I was younger and a little less in control of my
Emotions.
temper, I guess. Yeah. And I wasn't happy. So one Monday, I decided that immediately after the lunch rush of customers at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I would go out and I would follow up on their lists. And of course, nobody had anything done, and I got more angry. So I decided on Tuesday at 2 o'clock I was going to follow up, and nobody had anything done, and I was really angry. I figured Wednesday I'm going to do the same thing at 2 o'clock, and I do. And the first couple of department managers had nothing done, but then I get to the fashion department, and there's Regina. Regina comes walking towards me with a big smile on her face, and she had every single thing on her list done. And I asked her how she did it, and her answer was so simple, and it shaped my career for the really for the rest of my life. She said, "John, you came out 2 o'clock on Monday. I didn't have anything done. You came out Tuesday, 2 o'clock. I didn't have anything done. I figured you're probably going to come out 2 o'clock on Wednesday, and I didn't want to disappoint you." And to me, that was all I needed to learn about the frequency of inspecting the gaps. There clearly
Yeah.
had been gaps. I ramped up my frequency to inspect those gaps, and it had an impact on Regina, not because she was scared, but because she wanted to succeed and she didn't want to
Yeah.
disappoint me. It was her, it was in her. And,
Yeah.
the other department managers got it soon after, and all of a sudden we were cruising to radically reliable results in the store, all because I changed the frequency and the cadence of my follow-up.
Yeah. And I suppose, applying those methodologies, you're really instilling behaviors and reinforcing what's expected. So it's not like a sporadic, hey, why haven't you done this? And, people can understand because when things are replicatable, excuse my pronunciation, it's easier for them to understand, what's right, what doesn't work, and what the expectation is. But I think,
Your
John,
choice of words was great, by the way, reinforcing what's expected. That's a great choice of words. It's exactly Yep.
I think it also goes back a lot to what you were saying, when we're talking about where's the focus, teach it, fix it, or change the system, and starting with what's easy first. But, everything that you've sort of been saying to me as well is there's this element of trust and building that engagement and rapport with your employees where they can speak up to you and say, help you identify what those gaps are without you having to make assumptions and jump to conclusions and maybe getting a little bit hot under the collar.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think tell another story. I grew up when I was a young boy in the world of Taekwondo, martial arts, and the master of our school was an incredible man who could do incredible things with both his mind and his body. And he was an absolute expert in martial arts. And martial arts experts typically wear black belts, but Master Choi always wore a white belt. And I was a 9-year-old boy. I was a little intimidated to ask him why he wore a white belt, but I finally mustered up the courage. And his answer to me was, "I learn every day, so I wear a white belt." And
That's fantastic.
so I call it white belt mentality, right? As leaders, if we operate in white belt mentality, as if we're not the experts and we can still learn something, then the dialogues that we have with our team members are more likely to create an atmosphere where they feel comfortable sharing their opinions. And it has to be genuine though. You have to truly believe that you don't know everything. You have to truly believe that the people who are doing the work every day and the people who are on the front lines might actually know more than you, because
Yeah.
guess what? They probably do.
But I think that's such a great analogy to use. I mean, always have this white belt mindset because you're probably going to learn a lot more and be able to achieve and support your teams a lot more when you have that understanding and willingness to listen.
For sure.
Um, and then John, so you talk about the right environment in your book, and there's the element of the kind of mindset you have, the relationships and team climate that must exist for AIM to actually work. Can you explain a little bit more about what this right environment means for listeners?
Sure. We've talked about a couple of components already, like starting with the idea that people want to be successful, and that your job as a manager is to help them achieve that success. I think that is truly foundational. Authority, formal authority can be legislated, but actual authority is earned. And, I think leaders are wise to work on being a respectable people before they
Mm.
try and exert authority, or before they try and demand respect. And being a respectable person it's pretty simple in concept, maybe not so simple to achieve in everyday life, but it's using please and thank you, being a good listener, and not just having a conversation to get your own point across, and being willing to admit your own mistakes, and those types of behaviors, those types of respectable behaviors are important to the culture that is setting the right environment. Of course, to some extent, it's about the people on the team, right? I mean, the part of setting the right environment for a good AIM culture is that the team has to respect each other, and the
Mm.
people on the team have to be able to work together well. And have been many experiments and studies about bad apples on the team and what they can do to the overall environment and the overall attitudes. And you have one or two bad apples on a team of 10 or 20 people, and that can kind of undermine the spirit. And a lot of times the good people on the team, if they see people who aren't carrying their weight getting away with it, they can start to lose motivation. So I think having the right people on the team is pretty critical. And then, we talked about that idea of making sure that the environment is safe as well, that people are free to make mistakes, to try things, to ask questions, to disagree, and to challenge the status quo. That safe environment is critical as well. And I think it all leads to the idea of attitudes through the team that are effective and productive in moving things forward.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, have you had an experience where you've had to recalibrate respect between team members, and maybe some advice for managers and leaders where there's a little bit of discontent between teams, how to really break down those silos?
Yeah, all the time. It happens all the time. And I'll talk about it in my current role. I lead a group of exceptionally great professionals who are just wonderful at their jobs. And they're also very passionate about their roles, and they're very opinionated. And sometimes there's conflict.
Mm.
Sometimes, two people on my leadership team who are extremely good at what they do can have a particular problem, and they have to collaborate on the problem. And they can run into a brick wall with each other. And usually I find that those situations are exacerbated by m- you know a misunderstanding of intentions
Mm.
between the people, and they attribute a difference of opinion on approach to different intentions,
Mm.
or to different degrees of commitment to the ultimate result. And I find that my role in kind of resolving those conflicts boils down to a couple of things. First of all, making sure that both people, or all people involved, are seeing the desired result the same way, because sometimes there's a different definition of what the end result is, and that leads to some misunderstanding or confusion. So first, establishing a clear definition of what the end result is, so everybody's on the same page. And then secondly, making sure that we take off the table any question about intention,
Mm.
and we can make it clear that everybody's trying to get to the same place, and everybody's good at their jobs. Reasonable people can reasonably disagree about the approach. We can talk about it, and we can figure out, the path forward that everybody can agree to. But let's take the emotion out of it, and let's just
Mm.
accept that everybody wants to get to the same place.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think it sort of dovetails into, the other questions I was going to ask, and answers a lot of it. Is you also speak about the Tudometer in your book, and utilizing that. And then on the other side, also simplifying or creating standard language and routines amongst teams. So I suppose it removes a lot of that confusion or misalignment.
Yeah, two great points. I mean, I'll start with the second point first. That idea of common language kind of fits really well with my point about defining the end result. And sometimes within an organization, people truly are going after the same thing, but they're using different words. And the different words cause confusion, or cause misunderstanding. And so my approach is to try and put words, or put labels on all of the common objectives, or on all the common routines, and make clear that everybody's using the same language, so that everybody has the same understanding of what the processes are and what the objectives are. I love that you brought up the Tudometer. I love the Tudometer. I think the Tudometer is my way of kind of objectifying attitude. Let's face it, we all have attitudes about everything. And
Some
when it
louder
comes
than
to the
others.
when it comes to the work environment, sure, people come to work with different attitudes about the work that they're going to do. And it's variable, right? I mean, some days we have a better attitude than other days. And it's hard for us as managers and leaders to address attitude. If you accuse somebody of having a bad attitude, they get very defensive because that's a personal thing, right?
Yeah.
You're attacking them
Yeah.
on something that's very personal.
Yeah.
The Tudometer is simply it's a tool. It's a silly tool that it has a little scale from 0 to 10, and it has a phrase next to each one of the numbers 0 to 10 that describes what the attitude is. On the low end of the Tudometer, the phrase is something like, "I'm miserable and I don't care who knows it." And on the positive side of the Tudometer at a 10, the phrase is, "I am fully committed to achieving this result and nothing is going to get in my way." And every notch in between has a different phrase. And the idea is that by creating this, by using this silly little tool, a leader can have a conversation with a team member that takes the attitude off of the person and puts it on the Tudometer. So you can say to a team member something like, looking like you're a little low on the Tudometer today. Can you tell me what's going on? Or where do you think you are on the Tudometer right now?"
Yeah.
And by kind of switching the conversation to this object off to the side, it makes the conversation easier, and it makes it
Yeah.
less personal, and it almost gives the team member an out. It gives them an easy way to say, "Yeah, to be honest, I am pretty low on the Tudometer right now." "Oh, okay. Well, tell me what happened. Something you're not usually low on the team here. What happened to put you there?" And
Yeah.
then you can get into a conversation that resolves the issue rather than fighting about whether they have a bad attitude or not.
Yeah. And I think that also, such a useful tool to use for psychological safety as well. There's not getting attacked, or, those fears about how the information will be received. I think it's a really fantastic tool that leaders and managers can apply from tomorrow.
Yes, agreed. Agreed.
And then, John, the other thing I want to ask you, so for leaders who are listening and feeling overwhelmed and thinking to themselves, my culture's average, my team is tired, my plate is full, what is one small, slightly maybe boring action that they could start doing that, in your experience, would compound into radically reliable results?
Yeah, what a great question, because it's so prevalent. That type of situation is so prevalent. And I'll to answer it, I'll go back to the leadership balance model. And it sounds like, that description of a situation sounds like an environment where people are very much in the challenged quadrant,
Yeah.
and they're feeling stressed and overworked and unsuccessful. And so the the one thing that I would recommend a leader do is really lean into the idea of increasing confidence and increasing the feeling of success. And a simple, a really simple way to achieve that is to just find one thing to praise on for every member of the team, and give
That's
them give them some positive feedback, and unconditional positive feedback, not positive feedback with a next step on it or anything else. Just leave it at the positive feedback. And if people really want to, if managers really want to push themselves to do this in a visible way, I like to tell managers to put a rubber band on your wrist for every employee, and put it on your right wrist. And when you give them the positive feedback during the day, move the rubber band over to your left wrist. And at the end of the day, when you're done with your shift, if you still have rubber bands on your right wrist, you didn't give enough positive feedback. If they're all on your left wrist, you're good to go, and you've achieved your objective.
John, I'm going to get the rubber wrists and use them as corporate gifts in my next team building or management workshop. Very low
That
cost
is a cheap gift.
option,
That's great. I love it.
but that's fantastic. And then one last thing before we close out as well. In your book, you speak about the F's, not the F's in some bad language as some people
Yeah.
might be thinking of, but there are three of them. Can you tell us a little bit
Right.
about what those are and how managers can apply them?
Sure. My idea of the three F's is that these are the three management behaviors that are most critical to kind of driving execution, and they are focus, follow up, and feedback. and with a really brief summary of what they mean, focus, it's really easy for people to get distracted. Whether they get distracted onto personal stuff that takes them away from the work, or they get distracted on all of the competing and conflicting priorities that exist within a workday. It's our first objective, our first goal as a manager, a leader, is to help people stay focused and not get off the track on side ventures or anything else. And we need to help them kind of sort out all the extra stuff that comes up so that they can really dial into what's most important. Follow up. I'll go back to my story about Regina. The frequency of your follow up
Yeah.
is absolutely important. It, to use your phrase, it sets the expectation for what the standards are. There is no point in following up if you're not providing feedback.
Mm.
The entire point of following up is to get to the point of being able to give people feedback. And we've talked about a couple of different types of feedback during the course of this conversation. We've talked about constructive or redirective feedback, but we've also talked about positive reinforcing feedback, and both of those are important. But if you as a manager are consistently practicing the behaviors of focus, follow-up, and feedback, you are extremely likely to keep your team on track with an action item management culture, and you're much more likely to deliver those radically reliable results.
That's brilliant. That's really great advice. And it's three small things that they can apply and, really get to terms with and build their team's capacity and understanding and growth. Jon, so before we leave, I do want to share with our listeners where they can get a hold of your book when it is published.
Sure.
And then where can they connect with you if they want to chat to you?
Sure. Thank you so much. My book will be available on Amazon and Audible and Kindle. Easiest place to get all versions will be through Amazon.com. And my website is jondario.com, jondario.com. There'll be a link to purchase the book through my website as well. But there's also plenty of background about me and what services I provide, and direct contact link as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jon. It's been great having you, and I look forward to catching up sometime for a follow-up podcast.
100%. I truly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much, Lindy.
Thanks, Jon. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We really enjoyed having you. Remember to subscribe and follow us on LinkedIn for the latest news and updates, and be ready for more content from the Fifth Discipline, where we talk about everything to do with people, brand, and systems.